Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello, and welcome to episode 93 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. We're continuing our deep dive into the Loki show with guest Anne Valiant. Once again, we have more than an hour of talk between the two of us, so we'll skip the usual chit-chat and get right into it. We start off with the title of the episode itself. Anne?
Episode 4, The Nexus Event.
Yes, which has a couple of different meanings, I think.
Yeah, it applies in many, many cases here. I mean, heck, the very first scene, the capture of Sylvie as a 10-year-old in Asgard.
Right, or as I called her in my notes, Little Lady Loki.
Aww. Was in fact Little Lady Loki. You're not wrong. But there's no obvious Nexus event happening.
Yeah, she's just playing with her toys.
Yeah. Which actually led me to the question is if her birth is actually the Nexus event, but they have a minimum age where they abduct the variants.
Well, Sylvie kind of hints towards that when she's talking to Loki a little bit later. She says, I wasn't supposed to exist, but when I deviated enough from the sacred timeline, they came and got me and wiped out my reality. So, yeah, it seems like not just her existing was enough to branch off, but she had to have done something. Or maybe her birth just started the branch, but it sloped so slowly compared to other Nexus events that it took a while for them to notice it and do something about it.
That's true. Or just it was creeping so slowly towards the red line, they decided they didn't want a 6-year-old, 5-year-old, 3-year-old running around the TVA. And they were going to wait till she was old enough to start training.
Well, who knows? It depends on how much they know about how the TVA works with the variants.
Yes.
And we'll get into that in a little bit. But while we're still on this early scene, we get Ravonna working as a hunter instead of as a judge.
Right.
And did you notice her designation?
No, what was her designation?
She is A23.
Oh, so she's early.
She is early, and she is her own Easter egg.
Oh, is she now?
Because Avengers 23 was her first appearance in the comics.
Listen, swear to God, the shows especially, the movies, yes, but the shows especially lay eggs like a bunny all over the place just for you guys.
Oh yeah, so that was a cute little Easter egg for the fans, not something that gives anything away or hints towards anything necessarily.
I know that's the perfect level of Easter egg too. Yeah.
But the next scene makes me wonder how Ravonna ended up getting promoted, because Sylvie gets into the courtroom, she stomps on Ravonna's foot, steals her tempad, and gets away. That is not the kind of behavior you want to
promote.
Exactly.
I think Ravonna learned a lot after that experience of, not letting snot-nosed brats get hold of their temp pads. But yeah, I mean, Sylvie not only stomped Ravonna's foot, but also nailed her in the stomach with her elbow.
Yeah.
It was a stomach, then foot, and then, oh, look, I have your temp pad. And Ravonna, through the whole of Sylvie's capture, is completely unemotional until she's literally beaten up by a 10-year-old.
Yeah, you have to wonder if that kind of stuck in her craw and motivated much of her
anti-Loki sentiment.
Yeah, and her actions throughout the show so far.
Yeah.
And we get that this is a flashback for Ravonna because we cut to her opening her eyes and letting it all out. Right before she enters the timekeeper's room.
Or the principal's office, one or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so we see the timekeepers for the very first time.
In very scary looking silhouettes.
Yes. And something I noticed that I don't know if it means anything. I don't know if it's at all important. I've seen a theory that I didn't actually click on the article for, but I saw the headline because I can't help but see headlines.
That's the point. It did its job.
But behind the timekeepers is a big kind of neon, what to me looks like a rune.
Yes.
And the specific rune that it looks like is the same rune that is used in place of the O in Loki during part of the opening credits, when every letter flashes in different fonts and symbols and such. At one point, the O looks like the Otholon from Nordic runes.
Do you know what the Otholon means in Nordic runes?
According to Wikipedia, Otholon represents heritage, estate, and possession.
Interesting.
Moving on to Ravonna and Mobius discussing her meeting. We get her going into the meeting, we get the opening credits, and then we get her coming out of the meeting. We don't actually see what transpired inside.
No, that makes perfect sense. That's classic cinema setup.
Right.
Yeah.
And Mobius wants to talk to C20 about what happened because he points out what I pointed out in the second episode, where she was saying, it's real, it's real, it's real. And Mobius wants to find out what's real. But Ravonna says, no, you can't talk to her. She's dead.
Yeah. Her brain was too scrambled and she was okay until they got her back, and then a sharp decline.
Right. And now, even on my first watching, I thought Ravonna was hiding something in this conversation.
Absolutely agree. No, the first time I watched it, I went, no, it was not that simple. I don't think C20 is still kicking around, but I don't think it was. So it was a simple mental decline that, you know, she just shut down after a while.
Right. Like Mobius says, she was totally fine. A little freaked out, but she was okay when they brought her back. So for her to suddenly drop like that made no sense. And just the way Ravonna is acting in the scene, her sideways glances sometimes, and
she is very twitchy.
Yeah.
Very twitchy. The whole episode, she's very twitchy.
Oh, definitely. But we don't find exactly what she's hiding until a little bit later.
No.
Now we get back to Lamentus.
As we're just quietly waiting for the world to end.
Yes. And this shot, the first wide angle of Sylvie sitting on the rock as Loki walks towards her, that shot was in the trailer.
Oh, okay.
Or at least one of the trailers. And the way the light hit her hair in that scene and at that distance, a lot of people, including myself, thought that this was Black Widow at Vormir. And so we thought that Loki, in his various travels, was going to end up at the Soulstone planet and see Black Widow there. But turns out
incorrect.
We were wrong.
Solid supposition, but has proved incorrect.
Yes. But that's okay, because the scene we do get is
much more interesting.
Yeah. And much more, I'm sure, much more emotional than anything we would have gotten with Loki and Natasha interacting. Because we do get Sylvie finally really opening up and telling her backstory and telling how she does remember Asgard a little bit and how she ended up getting away and, living her life from apocalypse to apocalypse.
Yep. Sylvie identifies herself as a Nexus event.
Right.
And so she grew up in Nexus events. She lives, she dies in Nexus events. Well, so her impending doom would seem.
Exactly. Although the scene we get with her as a child and her describing everything really makes me wonder. It's one of those things that comic book nerds like to theorize about, is how does aging work for the Asgardians? How long in human years was she a little girl before she grew up? And how long is she going to be an adult? How exactly does all of that work? And what is her timeline? How long has she been on the run, so to speak?
One could make a wild estimate based off of, for me, a vague memory of either Thor or Loki saying in one of the movies that they're 1,200 years old.
Okay.
And so we could theorize that Sylvie is roughly between 1,000 and 1,200 years old. Because she seems maybe a little younger than Loki and Thor, give or take, but not a lot.
Right. The actress definitely is younger than Tom Hiddleston is.
Well, and that being said, she theoretically should be the same age as Tom Hiddleston, but not necessarily, because there's this is hurting my head. We're going to move on. Well, and how long can you live in an apocalypse?
Well, like she said, she went from, originally she started just going from location to location, and anywhere she went, she caused a Nexus event because she wasn't supposed to A, exist, or B, be there.
Right.
And it wasn't until later that she discovered that she could go from apocalypse to apocalypse and live kind of between the cracks of the TVA.
Right.
But yeah, it's the same kind of thing with Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And people are making a lot of comparisons between the Loki show and the Doctor Who show.
Not unreasonably.
Yeah, you can definitely see those parallels.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you're living on this timeline where you're not living your life along the timeline flow with everyone else, if you're going from place to place to place, how long was she doing that from her point of view? It could be anywhere from 20 years to 1,000 years from her point of view.
Yeah.
It's impossible to say. But like I said, it's one of those little questions that's interesting to theorize on, even if we have nothing to give us any concrete answers.
Right.
But we get a quick cut back to the TVA. While Sylvie is telling her backstory, we cut back to the TVA, and Mobius and B-15 are hunting for the two variant Lokis. And we see Mobius now has to lie about C-20.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in the meantime, you're looking at B-15, and she's shaky.
Yeah.
She clearly has some trauma going from that event at Roxcart, which we'll get into more.
Oh, definitely.
But anytime you see B-15, she's progressively getting more and more concerned about what happened back at Roxcart.
Yeah. She asks about C-20, but she doesn't ask directly about what happened yet.
Correct.
And so that's just a real quick cut, and we go back to Lamentis, and Sylvie asks, is what makes a Loki is that we're destined to lose?
Mm-hmm. Which our Loki argues, it's not the losing, but the surviving the loss that makes a Loki.
Yes, which ties into what I was saying last episode, I believe. He may not always have his plans go well, but he always finds a way to escape no matter what.
Correct.
And it's during this conversation that Loki expresses his admiration for Sylvie.
Correct.
You can tell that he really admires what she's done for herself. And when Sylvie reaches out and touches Loki's arm,
all of a sudden,
a Nexus spike
A big Nexus spike.
Yeah, one that they have never seen before. And you look at the screen and you can see that line headed towards the red line just about as fast as it can go.
Yep. It's nearly vertical. It's not totally vertical, but it's nearly vertical.
Yeah. So despite an apocalypse, which should hide this sort of thing, they are able to locate the two Lokis because of this Nexus spike.
Now, because you pointed it out at the very beginning, I noted this several times during this episode.
Mhm.
Whenever they get to some sort of emotional crescendo, there's theremin music.
It does seem to be a common instrument in the score.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at first it was mostly used in Ravona's office, and we get some more of it in her office later in this episode. It's an interesting instrument. It's one of those things that I would love to try someday, because it seems like it would be easy to learn, difficult to master.
Yes. The how is easy, the perfecting it, the actually making it listenable is hard.
Yeah. It seems like you could make basic notes and learn, I want to go down, but how far down you want to go, all that sort of thing. Yeah. And it's a very eerie, otherworldly sound. And so it fits the TVA very well. In addition to the points I made in the first episode, it's one of those instruments that never fully caught on.
Yep.
And so fits right into the TVA's aesthetic.
Yes. And it was big during the 60s. The time that it made its impact was during the 60s, more or less. And again, that kind of suits the aesthetic of the TVA.
So we get the TVA capturing them, although we don't get to see like a fight or anything. And they separate the two. And so first we go to Loki and Mobius.
Yeah, you get a slow-mo perp walk with her fighting a little bit, and then Loki fights him a little bit when they take her away, and he keeps getting pulled down the hall.
Yeah. And we get some more of the great chemistry between Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston here. Even if they're not friendly with each other, they still have that back and forth between them that works so well. The line of, "You're not really the god of mischief," and then following that up with, "You're just kind of an asshole and a bad friend."
God of self-sabotage, the god of backstabbing. You're an asshole.
Although I think friend is really stretching their relationship. Up to
friend
this
is a very strong word for any relationship they've established so far.
They've been maybe friendly co-workers at one point.
There's a good start to a friendship. There's definitely the foundations of a friendship, but there's not, you're my best friend, dude. I think Mobius might be more attached to Loki because Mobius has been studying Loki. So he already feels like he knows this guy. It's like when anybody thinks that they could be bestest friends with some celebrity that they've never met or they're unlikely to meet.
Right.
But they've read all the things and they know their lives and they're like, oh no, we could totally be friends.
The other thing is that other than maybe Ravonna, who would Mobius have as a friend?
Well, exactly. Friend doesn't seem like a thing that you do in the TVA. Everybody just does their job.
Right. And, they get a little back and forth. And then it looks like Mobius is about to put Loki into what we learn is the time cell. And this is where Loki finally tells Mobius the truth about the TVA.
Well, he doesn't tell him the truth yet. It's the TVA is lying to you.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's enough of the truth to
start asking questions.
Right.
That puts the grain of doubt, the seed of doubt, in the shadow of a doubt. I'll stop. Into Mobius's mind, and he starts going, wait a minute. Because there've got to been little things over the years that just never added up.
Yeah. Although up until this point, Mobius has been hook, line, and sinker all in on the TVA. Later, when Loki says, maybe the timekeepers should be brought down, Mobius is like, I ought to box
Her
your
ears.
ears. So yeah, he's still pretty much under the TVA's thumb at this point and still a true believer, but there's just that tiny little kernel that will start to spread as the episode goes on. But first we get the time cell. And I love that they brought Jamie Alexander back for this scene.
Oh, I'm not sure they actually quite did.
Well, we know that the actress is appearing in Thor 4.
Good.
So I'm nearly positive that that's her and she's there. What now, when you say you don't think they did, what are you saying?
Because there's no credit for Jamie Alexander in the credit sequence, but there is for her stunt double. So I have questions of, did they have to work some digital mojo in order to make this scene happen for one reason or another?
I think she was really there. I think it's an uncredited cameo so that they could surprise the audience. Yeah. I haven't looked into it to see if there are any interviews or anything that say definitively one way or the other, but they got Jamie Alexander to do something.
Yes, she definitely had to do the lines at some point or another.
Yeah. Even if there was never a moment where Tom Hiddleston and Jamie Alexander were in the same room, they still filmed Jamie Alexander for this scene.
Right.
And the story of this moment that Loki is reliving is actually from mythology.
That does not surprise me. So Loki at some point cut off Sif's hair.
Yes, but in the story, he cut off her hair.
Right.
It's not just a lock that she's holding in her hand. In the mythology, she is basically bald or
crew cut,
stubby. Yeah. But in the mythology, Sif is a blonde.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a story about him having to replace it using a wig made from the finest golden strands. But I enjoyed that they did choose a tale from mythology to illustrate Loki's
past mischievousness.
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. Although, if I had been choosing one, I would have taken the story where Loki convinces Thor to dress in drag as his mother in order to convince a troll that he's getting married to Frigga.
I mean, there's a lot going for that, but I don't think they could have talked Chris Hemsworth into it. I mean, they could have talked Chris Hemsworth in dressing in drag in order to pull off the scene. It's a scheduling issue.
Yeah, that, and the creators of the show have said they didn't want to bring Thor in because they feel like Loki and Thor's relationship has reached its natural conclusion.
Yeah.
And so any reintroduction of the two of them would be a regression.
Well, and the way that they wrote this scene, it certainly does all the work you want it to do at this point.
Oh,
because
definitely.
Thor is too sweet for what Sif delivers to Loki. Yeah, Thor is a golden retriever. He's just a puppy dog most of the time, which is why he can't handle it when there's too much sadness. Meanwhile, you got Sif, who is angry and perfectly fine with telling you what she thinks of you. Because every time she serves him conniving, craving, pathetic worm with a couple of punches, and you deserve to be alone and always will be.
Yeah, I noted that line especially.
Oh, yeah.
You know, one has to assume that Mobius chose the specific moment.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly the message that he is trying to send to Loki. Yeah. He feels betrayed.
Yes.
You know, he does feel like a friend stabbed him in the back. And so he is giving a message to that friend or ex-friend that this is what you did to me. And so I hope you know you deserve to be alone and you always will be. And so that could be coming out of Mobius's mouth just as easy as it comes from Sif's.
You have so much of a theme too of Loki craved attention. He's craved focus. He is a narcissist.
Mhm.
He wants the worship and adoration. But that is all a method of avoiding a true emotional connection with somebody. And as historical figures have said, that adoration, that worship can get very, very lonely because you do not have the emotional connection. So Loki thinks that his goals of being worshipped and adored fulfill the loneliness when they will not, because what he needs is an emotional connection. What he's afraid of is an emotional connection, because that opens you up to being damaged.
Right. He says it later after he's been in the time cell for a while, is that he knows why he does this. And it's because he's afraid to be alone.
Yep.
He just wants the attention. He doesn't care if it's good or bad attention. He's a spoiled little child.
Yep.
And doesn't know any better, even though he's lived for over 1,000 years.
Yep.
But before we get to that revelation, we get Mobius again back with Ravonna, and he wants to interview Sylvie.
Yes.
But Ravonna is saying, no,
Yeah.
no one can talk to Sylvie.
And she starts very light. She dodges it and kind of butters up Mobius a little bit to direct him back towards Loki.
Right.
But he keeps pushing the wanting to interview Sylvie. And eventually she's just like, no, go work your Loki. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Work your Loki. Find out what the Nexus spike
Yes.
was. And no one is allowed to talk to Sylvie. So don't bring it up again.
Right. Also in the scene, we find out that there are vampires.
Yes, I was just getting there. Yeah, because Mobius leaves and then talks with B-15, and he says, we brought in Kree, Titans, and vampires. Kree have been the villains in the Captain Marvel movie, Guardians of the Galaxy, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So they've been all over the place. Titans, Thanos is a Titan.
Yep.
But vampires are a new addition to the MCU.
Yeah.
And so they're just laying those little seeds so that when the Blade movie comes out...
I was about to say, when does Blade come out again?
It's a ways away at this point still.
Aren't they doing Moon Knight? And doesn't that have something to do with vampires?
Moon Knight, not usually.
Okay.
He first appeared in Werewolf by Night. So there is a mystical connection there, but he's an entire other story. He is literally insane in some stories, has multiple personality, or to use more modern terms, dissociative identity disorder. And so whether or not he actually is connected to the Egyptian god Khonshu, or whether it is all in his head, has varied.
Excellent.
So he could be mystically connected. He could be insane.
He could just be
clinically insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a clinically nuts guy in a white suit fighting crime.
He's chaotic nuts.
But at the end of that conversation, where we get the quick vampire tease, we get to see more of B-15 breaking down and wanting to know what is going on.
And at that point, Mobius tells B-15 that Loki has said that the TVA is lying.
Yeah.
And again, we haven't specified what the lie is as of yet. But again, that's that expanding shadow of a doubt.
Mm-hmm. Although the very first watch through on this, I kind of wondered at this point if B-15 was spying on Mobius for Ravonna. If she was watching for signs that he was losing his way, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did not get that vibe. She saw something when she was possessed by Sylvie and now has questions.
Yeah. And obviously by the end of the episode, that's obvious. But like I said, just on my first watch through, I kind of wondered if that's where this was going to head, where, you know, Mobius breaks off and then has to fight B-15 or something like that. But moving on from there, we do get back to Loki, and who knows how many loops he's been through at this point. because he has just basically given up.
Yeah.
He's apologetic. He's acknowledging everything he's done wrong. But there's, in certain mythologies, we've seen if you can break the loop, if you can fix your mistakes, then you can move on.
I believe that's the entire premises of Quantum Leap.
True. But I was thinking more of like the TV show Lucifer.
Yes.
And The Good Place.
Yes.
So I was kind of thinking along those lines, and I was kind of thinking that maybe at some point he would break through and get to a better ending. But even with him being as contrite as he was at this point, he still ends up with Sif telling him, "You're alone and you always will be." And so he basically ends up in the same place still. But hope arrives in the form of Mobius. At first, they don't get anywhere.
No.
They just kind of have more of that back and forth.
Yeah, Mobius implies that Loki is working for Sylvie. Loki says, no, she's a means to an end. And he's absolutely not giving any details of their plan, she says with air quotes, to avoid being pruned.
Yeah.
It keeps getting heightened, and Loki finally says, fine, I am Sylvie's puppet master. We have been planning this for centuries. It's been coming along nicely. Sylvie is disposable.
And that's when Mobius tells Loki, well, good thing she's disposable because she's been pruned.
Yep.
And Loki, again, has a horrible, horrible poker face.
Yes, he does.
Because you can just tell by looking at him, and Mobius sees it right away, that this hurts.
Yep.
Loki had grown fond of Sylvie.
Yep.
And I love Mobius's reaction to all of this when he realizes what has happened and that they like each other.
It's completely high school. You know, I was waiting for him to say, you like her.
Does she like you?
Do I need to pass her a note during lunch?
But the line of, what an incredible seismic narcissist. You fell for yourself. And I mean, that is the literal narcissist. If you go back to Greek myth.
Oh, yeah.
He fell in love with his reflection in the mirror. In the river. But yeah, he points out what many people online have been pointing out is that he fell in love with himself, basically.
Who else are you going to fall in love with? I mean, come on, especially that guy. You know, some people fall in love with their opposites. They do the opposites attract thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are looking for an exact duplicate of themselves. But and in this case, this is an exact duplicate. Well, not an exact duplicate. They've been raised differently, different experiences, but a very similar personality.
Mm-hmm.
And who else is going to understand you better than you?
Right. It makes total sense, but at the same time, it is incredibly narcissistic.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you have to be very self-involved to fall for somebody who is
you.
Yeah. So then the teasing from Mobius gets to him, and he
just snaps.
Just kind of, and says, look, you're all variants. Every single one of you. You know, the TVA took you away from the sacred timeline, put you here, wiped your memories, and Mobius still isn't believing him.
He does not buy it yet.
But I think he starts to buy it when Loki says, you're the biggest liar of everyone here with the lies you tell yourself.
Yes.
I think that's when it finally really cracks in and sticks in Mobius's craw, because the way Loki says it, just the resignation makes Mobius think, this guy could be telling me the truth, or at least he believes it.
It's worth investigating further.
Right. And we'll see where that investigation goes in a second, but we get a brief scene where B-15 goes to see Sylvie and takes her away somewhere.
Well, and before that, you see B-15 having a bit of a crisis.
Yes.
I mean, she's having a crisis. She's staring at that poster, which is very Big Brother.
Oh, incredibly. And it's all about thorough deletion.
Yeah. Did you get them all? Verify through deletion. This is very Cold War. It is kill all the spies. It is take away the person and make sure that they are never seen again, that they are removed from the situation permanently. But with that, she goes, grabs Sylvie, and they go take a walk.
And again, they're cutting these things in and out, so we get just enough information to make us think this could go in any number of directions.
Yeah. Well, they're making a good spy movie at this point.
Yeah. But then we cut back to Mobius and Ravonna meeting up to wrap up all their paperwork and have a drink.
With theremin music in the background.
Of course.
Off a reel-to-reel recorder.
Well, really, what other playback machine are you going to use for theremin?
That's true. I was about to say a mini disc player, but
I was thinking maybe an 8-track.
Maybe.
And she asks a question here that this is one of those questions that I would love to get an answer from like everybody I meet. I think it's one of those kind of icebreaker questions that you could ask anyone and they would have their answer would tell you something about themselves.
If you could go anywhere, anytime, where would you go?
So, Anne.
Oh, God, now I have to think of an answer? Jeez. Most of the time, it's a cabin in the woods. Just nice, dense, green woods and nobody else around. But that might be the plague speaking.
Yeah.
What about you, Kurt?
Whenever I imagine time traveling, as I've mentioned, time travel is one of my favorite story tropes. So it's something I imagine more than the average person, probably. But I always find myself trying to save someone.
Aw.
Usually someone, well, it's always someone I admire in some way or form. Either John Lennon or Kennedy or Freddie Mercury, just going back in time and changing something so that the people whose work I admire get time to create more of it.
Getting Alan Turing someplace safe where he could be himself. Yeah. Oh, you're all like moral and good and stuff. And I'm like, give me a cabin in the woods. Tell everybody to go away. I'm going to go be the Unabomber and without the bombing.
And I'll be the one that stops you. But at this point, we don't get Mobius's answer to this question.
No, he dodges that question. I mean, he just up and down dodges it. He's focusing on the interrogation of Sylvie or getting a chance to interrogate Sylvie.
Yeah, well, getting a chance to interrogate Sylvie or finding out more about C20 and what happened to her. He just keeps going in with questions and questions and questions. And Ravonna is like, you want to hear the reason why? It's because I was scared.
Yeah, she is trying to protect him from seeing bad things.
Right.
Yeah.
And we find out that that's not completely the truth necessarily, but I can see her point of view where she doesn't want the thought that maybe this is not real, even though she has been told by C20 that no, we're all variants. I think she is still on the TVA's side 100%.
Well,
she either doesn't want to believe it or doesn't care if it's true or not.
See, that's
she
it.
She thinks what the TVA does is too important.
Right. Now, I think she believes in the mission. I think she already knows that they're all variants.
Now, do you think she knew that before she talked to C20? Do you think she's known all along?
I think she's known since she became a judge.
Okay.
I think that might be a thing that a piece of information you get as a judge, and that like seals your getting the job. Can you handle this information without spilling this information? Can you still be true to the mission of the TVA even if you are not just created to be part of the TVA. And maybe that's part of the reason she keeps trophies, is an acknowledgement of that these were lives beforehand. And I find this whole her being scared or her protecting Mobius from the scary thing is weird, because she did just invite him to Sylvie's execution.
True.
She's like, oh yeah, the timekeepers want to oversee the execution themselves and they want you to be there.
Which, if they both were still true believers in the TVA and its mission, this would be a big deal for Mobius.
Yeah.
He pointed out that he has not met the timekeepers yet,
right,
up to this point. So the fact that he's being invited to this event that the timekeepers are overseeing,
yeah,
would be a very big deal to him if he were still on the TVA side.
Well, and the fact that he doesn't just go, oh boy,
right.
I finally get to meet the timekeepers. It says that he's shaken on this. His belief has been shaken. And it also takes Ravonna leaning into their friendship and the value of the timeline to kind of get him away from the subject, which he does by finishing his drink and heading out of the room.
Right. Now, before we move on from this scene, there's one important thing to note, and then there's one little theory I want to bring up.
Okay.
Let me start with the little theory. The pen that they're using to wrap up this paperwork is the same pen that Mobius took special note of.
And he takes special note of it again in one of the scenes that she's either using it or when they're doing the paperwork.
Yeah, he picks it up and he looks at it specifically. So here's my theory. That's his trophy.
Oh.
FDR High School was where Mobius was before he was taken off the timeline.
That is a solid theory. That's why he keeps being attracted to it. I'm going to add to it. I'm betting Mobius was either like a teacher or a guidance counselor or an administrator at said high school.
I was thinking teacher or principal. Yeah.
And he was planning his summer vacation to get on a jet ski.
Yeah, that seems likely.
I mean, he does have the jet ski thing.
Yeah, it keeps coming back. But the important thing to note at the end of this scene is that while Ravonna is putting up her new trophy, Mobius swaps his tempad for hers without her noticing.
Yep. I think he's learned a few things from our Loki.
He's been spending too much time with Lokis.
Yeah, far too much time with Lokis. It's contagious.
And speaking of spending some time with Lokis, we get back to B-15 and Sylvie to find out where they went.
They went to a hurricane.
Yes, they went back to Roxcart. And so B-15 gets Sylvie to basically bring back her pre-TVA memories.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least take a look at that life.
Which apparently was overall a happy one, which makes me theorize that B-15 was one of the late for work variants, that it was a very small thing that tipped her off into variant land.
Or it could be that whatever she did made her happier.
Mm-hmm.
Who says that Nexus events are always a bad thing for the people involved? For our Loki, the Nexus event involved him escaping from prison.
Yeah. Well, and the Nexus event where they found Sylvie and Loki was Sylvie touching the other Loki.
Right.
Or Sylvie touching our Loki. She just reached out and touched him, and then all of a sudden, spike.
Yeah. Although they've touched each other in the past.
It was the intent. Yes. It was the intent behind the touch. It wasn't just a casual touch. It was the comfort and attraction.
Right. It's not just if two different variants of the same person touch each other, then a Nexus spike occurs.
Right.
There was something purposeful in the way she touched him that caused that spike. So after we see Sylvie and B-15 together, then we get Mobius sneaking off to the records room.
Hiding in the stacks like he's in college.
Right. Making out with somebody.
Exactly.
but he's not making out with somebody. He made out with Ravona's tempad
Nicely done.
and watches the debriefing of C20
Mm-hmm.
and sees her saying, "We're all variants."
Yep.
And then sees that Ravona was lying
Yep.
about what happened to C20.
And the information that C20 gave in the interview. I mean, Ravona said C20 got back and declined quickly.
She couldn't even form words at the end,
Exactly.
according to Ravona.
So,
but she is forming very specific words.
And very coherent words. I mean, she's freaked, but she's making clear statements, much clearer than she did back at Roxcart. And for Mobius, this is like at least the third confirmation that we're all variants, I think, that he's gotten. Or maybe it's just the second.
I think it's the second. Where would you say are the three?
We're all very. Oh, you know what? I was adding one of Sylvie's in. So yeah, it's the second.
Okay.
Yeah. It's our third confirmation of we're all variants.
Well, it's our like fourth or fifth at this point, because we found that out last episode.
Yep. And of course, the person running C20's interview is Ravona herself.
Yeah, and she says, "I'm ending this." And yeah, we see that close up on the screen. And yeah, Mobius at this point is shook.
Yep.
And so he decides to go and talk to Loki again.
Yep.
And here's where I actually do start buying their friendship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with the conversation between the two of them and, you know, him saying, "I have to trust the word of two Lokis," and Loki's response of, "How about the word of a friend?" Yes.
Which, if it depends on who you are watching this, because if you are more of a true believer, you're going, "Aw," and if you are a cynical person like me, I'm going, "Oh yeah, that's a solid manipulation there. Good job."
Well, then I guess I'm a true believer, because I smiled at that moment, and I've said from the beginning that I love Loki and Mobius together. And so having them get along and be on the same side
is always nice.
Yeah, that was a happy moment for me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, very brief.
Yeah. Well, and Mobius follows it up to Loki with assurances that Loki could be a good person. He could be anything he wants. He could be a good person.
In case somebody ever told you differently.
Yes.
A nice way of apologizing without saying the words, "I'm sorry."
Because he's a dude and he can't do that.
I'm sorry.
Ah! Listen, you.
But like I said, that happy moment is very brief.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they walk out of the time cell, Ravona is there waiting for them.
Yeah. With Mobius's temp pad.
Yeah. And takes her temp pad back and then gives the order, and Mobius is pruned.
Yeah. And everybody watching the show goes, "Wait a minute. Whoa.
Well, it's like I said last episode when you pointed out how Owen Wilson wasn't in the credits for the previous episode.
Yep.
They can have a character just no longer be in the show at any point.
At any given point.
They can do that. And
wasn't expecting Marvel to go quite so Game of Thrones. And I still suspect that they won't go quite so Game of Thrones, but you know.
Yeah, we'll get to the very end of the episode soon, but that obviously devastates Loki.
Yeah.
Watching his friend be taken away right after finally admitting being his friend in the first place.
Well, and right after the loss of Mobius, you get more theremin music. Ravona very clearly has some regrets about having to do this, but she is a true believer. You know, she did what she had to do, even though it hurt, which makes me wonder if she was raised by the TVA. That however early that she was pulled out as a variant was early enough that she was just completely, she didn't have as many memories to remove.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And from what we see, she seems to believe that the timekeepers are the timekeepers.
Yes.
But because we didn't see her discussion with the timekeepers in that earlier scene, it could be that she is one of the few people who is aware that they are not actually the timekeepers. I mean, she could have had a conversation with whoever is the actual power
Yes.
behind the TVA and come out and still be concerned and just call it the timekeepers.
Keep up the illusion of the timekeepers.
Right.
This is the man behind the curtain stuff.
And if that's the case, then I think the person who might be actually behind the TVA is Kang.
Okay.
Because Ravonna does have that connection to him in the comics, and we know he's showing up in Ant-Man and the Wasp 3.
Yeah.
So
yeah. This could be setting that up.
We could be setting that up and see him as maybe like a final cameo at the end. So getting back to the show.
We're now when Ravonna goes in to find a wet Sylvie.
Yes.
And no B-15.
Yeah, Loki gets taken away, and then Ravonna goes to find Sylvie, and Sylvie is damp. And it's obvious that she has left this room at some point and finds out that B-15 came in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, Ravonna puts out the alert for B-15 saying she's been compromised too. Take her down.
Mm-hmm.
So Ravonna is losing all of her support staff.
Oh, yeah, right and left.
But she's still got control over the organization. And so she has other Minutemen take the two variant Lokis to the Timekeepers and just rubs it in a little bit more when they're in the elevator. And Sylvie asks what her Nexus event was. What was it that caused her to be taken away?
To which Ravonna replies that she does not remember, which I am calling a lie.
It definitely could be.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I think she remembers very specifically, or has some other attachment to it that makes her feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah. At the same time, Ravonna probably dealt with so many variants over the years that it could be, you were just another
job.
Variant to me. Yeah, you were just one of many jobs. You're one that happened to go wrong, but you're not important enough to me to bother remembering what it was that brought you here in the first place.
Right.
Which for any Loki is going to be very difficult to take.
Yeah, now that's a big insult right there.
And then after that, we get the Lokis taken into the Timekeeper's fog room.
I call it the temple because it's got a very temple kind of feel to it.
Yeah. And like I pointed out towards the top of the episode, you can see what look like to me runes all over the place. So yeah, it does seem like kind of a sacred space. And like I said, I've seen theories, even though I didn't click on them to read all the details. I saw headlines enough to know that at least one person theorized that that's why Loki's magic doesn't work.
Oh, because they're warded. Yeah, that's a solid theory.
And so that would mean that whoever is behind the TVA would be another wizard or witch.
Right.
Or sorcerer, or
somebody with the power in order to negate other magic.
Yeah, somebody familiar with runes and how they work.
Now, I have named the Timekeepers. Our center one is Oz the Great and Powerful.
Okay.
On the lower left is the Walrus. And on the right is Grumpy. Fair
enough. The Walrus, I don't know why, but I kept thinking William H. Macy.
Yes. No, I see it. It's that big old Fargo mustache.
But yeah, the Walrus, I will gladly accept that nickname. Yeah, so we've got the Timekeepers there, and they give their big, mysterious proclamations and ask, do you have anything to say before we dispose of you, basically?
Mm-hmm.
And the two Lokis aren't having it.
No. Nope.
They are defiant to the end.
Oh yeah. No, the group Oz the Great and Powerful orders that they be deleted. Sylvie steps forward, the twister fails, and then we get some help.
Yeah, I liked how, we saw Ravonna use the time twister to send her back, and then it kind of glitches out, and Ravonna's like, wait, what's going on? And then we see behind her B-15 with her own time twister and using it to set Loki and Sylvie free from their collars, and then tossing Sylvie her sword, which means at some point B-15 broke into Ravonna's office.
Yes, and stole her sword.
And we get just another incredible fight scene here. Again, the choreography and the way that Loki and Sylvie work together.
Yeah, they start back to back and they try to stick close to each other and pass each other weapons at one point or another.
Yeah, he asks for a little help and she tosses him her sword and then grabs one of the hunter's weapons.
Yeah,
instead.
The hunter batons, which suddenly have pointy ends.
Yeah, that does seem like a new addition, but I was fine with it.
Yeah. It's also easily retractable into the weapon.
Right.
So, I mean, they could have always had pointy ends, and now you push the button that makes the pointy bit come out.
Exactly.
Which means you need to dodge both ends of the stick.
Yeah, it's now a double-sided weapon. But near the end of the fight, Sylvie knocks Ravonna out. Just one punch to the face.
Ravonna's been out of the field for a while, clearly.
Apparently. And then throws her sword at Oz the Great and Powerful, and the curtain is revealed. We finally get the reveal that the Timekeepers are androids.
Yep.
The Timekeepers are not the real power behind the throne.
Now, allow me to say, called it.
Well, yes.
I knew from the beginning that these guys weren't literal giant space lizards that controlled all time. Come on.
I think we both called it to one extent or another.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems ridiculous and it seems unlikely, but at the same time, this is the same universe that has given us a talking raccoon and a tree that communicates in 3 words.
Sure.
So, especially since it is something that comes straight from the comics, having 3 space lizards in charge of time wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility.
No, it definitely was not out of the realm of possibility, but it was too neat.
Yeah. And Sylvie seems like she's about to give up at this point. And Loki, again, you can just tell his feelings for her, even if she can't. And it seems like he's about to tell her that he loves her.
Yeah, he's either about to confess his feelings or kiss her. Yeah. One or the other is about to happen, but no.
No, Ravonna woke up from her beating and prunes Loki.
And then the theremin plays.
Yes, but very quickly, Sylvie takes Ravonna back down and says, okay, you're going to tell me everything. And we cut to the end credits.
Yep. The song over tonight's end credits is If You Love Me, Really Love Me by Brenda Lee is the performer, but Edith Piaf wrote the original. It was originally a French song.
Oh, okay.
I read the credits.
I just Googled closing song episode 4 Loki. So, yes, I also found If You Love Me by Brenda Lee. I had assumed the song was called Make It Happen, just from the lyrics. But yeah, the running theme of this episode is Loki's feelings for Sylvie. So it's very fitting. And then we get something we haven't gotten from the Loki show up to this point yet, which is the traditional Marvel mid-credits scene.
As everybody sits around utterly traumatized, going, what? How can, what? And then he's lying in the grass.
Yeah. Wondering if he's dead or if he's in hell. But according to the voice, not yet, but he will be if he doesn't come with them.
Yeah, and then we get the best reveal of the series, I think, so far, where you have 3.5 Lokis.
I'm going to call it 4.
Okay. I'm not arguing that.
Yes, we get, you had suspected that Richard E. Grant was playing an older Loki.
Yes.
And you called it, but he is credited as classic Loki.
Yes.
And that is a perfect description because he is wearing the costume straight out of Loki's appearance throughout most of his appearances in the Marvel comics, especially if you go back to the 60s and 70s when he first appeared, and most of his run through Stan Lee's writing him and then other writers who followed up.
No, it's the bright colors.
Bright green and bright yellow classic Loki costume straight out of a Jack Kirby drawing.
How many colors did a comic book originally get printed in? It was limited.
Yes. There's actually another podcast I was on called Titular Characters, where we talked about coloring for quite a bit. In the old days, they basically had 4 colors.
Okay.
They had cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. And they could do any of those colors in either, I think the options were basically 10%, 25%, 50%, and 100%. And so you had to use those combinations to get any colors you wanted.
Now you can get a lot of colors that way.
Oh yeah, you can definitely get a lot of colors that way. The skin tone was basically yellow and red, each at I think 25%. And so that's why superheroes, especially in the early days, in the 30s up to the 70s and even the 80s, we didn't get the real good color separation until the mid to late 80s. And then computer coloring came around in the 90s. And so those early comic book costumes, all the heroes were in primary colors. You wanted to be able to use the 100% saturation, and so you made it pure magenta, which is basically red, or pure cyan, which is basically blue, or pure yellow, which is yellow.
Really?
And then the villains used the secondary colors in order to contrast with the heroes. So they used greens, which was cyan and yellow at 100% mixed together, or purple, which is magenta and cyan mixed together, or orange, which is magenta and yellow mixed together, and all at 100%. So you get that bright pop off the page. So that's the costume that Richard E. Grant is wearing. And I just had to freeze that scene and
he looks so grumpy.
Just soak it all in. He looks so grumpy. The costume doesn't look like it quite fits him anymore. It looks like he's
aged.
It looks like he's wearing the same costume he wore when he was 30.
Oh yeah.
But just aged out of it, and now it's sagging in places.
Well, and if you look at the edges, they're dirty. I mean, it's all very worn. It fits the environment that they're in. But yeah, the edges are grubby. It's seen better days.
Definitely. But it's still very bright.
Oh, yeah.
And then with him is a character that is credited as Boastful Loki, which is a black man carrying a hammer. Not Mjolnir necessarily.
Looks like a steampunk Mjolnir, meaning that it's been cobbled together.
Yeah, I could see that. And then the third human Loki is Kid Loki, which we discussed quite a bit last episode. And he's got the little diadem with just the little tiny horns.
And it's attached to or worn as well as a helmet that has little wings on it.
Okay.
So there was some debate between Chet and my friend Aaron, who was visiting this last week, about what that helmet was. I think we talked about it for like 10 minutes. It was a stupid long conversation.
And finally, Kid Loki is holding what I'm going to call Croaky.
Goes with Throg.
Exactly. So Croaky is Crocodile Loki. And while there has been no equivalent of a Crocodile Loki in the comics at any point in the past, there has been Throg, which is the Thor frog or Frog Thor.
Yep.
At one point in the past, Loki enchanted Thor and turned him into a frog. And then later, there was another human who was turned into a frog named Simon Walterson, which is basically a spoonerism of Walter Simonson, who wrote and drew the Frog Thor story, who was also turned into a frog and was gifted from Thor a splendor of Mjolnir's handle and is also able to turn into Frog Thor, or Throg, as he is sometimes called in the comics. And so I am desperately hoping that Crocodile Loki, or Croaky as I'm calling him, means that we will at least get a reference to Frog Thor at some point in this show.
Now, you see, the story I heard about Throg was it was just an ordinary frog who found the splinter of Mjolnir, but because he was a worthy frog, he gained the powers of Thor and eventually goes to Asgard, and the Asgardians are just like, what? And meanwhile, Thor is like, brother, let's go drink. And that Throg protects the pond in Central Park.
Yes, that last part is true.
Okay.
But the first Frog Thor was Thor.
Yep.
So they're making some deep cut references with this final mid-credit scene here. And it looks like they're actually going to pay off.
Uh-huh.
The fact that they cast Richard E. Grant as one of these characters,
they're not messing around.
That was not just a one-shot cameo. That is not his final scene. So we're going to see more of classic Loki and Kid Loki and boastful Loki and Croaky, I hope, in this next episode.
I have far too high of expectations for Croaky. I really do.
I just wonder if he's going to talk or not.
Yes.
Yeah, I have not looked forward to an episode of TV as much as I am looking forward to this next episode in quite some time. This next one looks like it's going to be insane and fun, or just insanely fun.
We do have a patty cake spoon scale.
Oh, yes, of course.
Cannot forget the spoon scale.
Please.
All right. Patty gives this episode a 9 out of 10 because she's still not okay. She's full of anxiety and she needs more and she needs answers. And now to directly quote her, I love that he's clearly grown emotionally. The fact that he's found someone who he can connect with emotionally is amazing. And I'm forgiving the fact that it's technically himself.
Well, you are, but not all of the fans are. I have read some people refer to it as self-cessed.
Whatever. You're two different beings. You came from two different timelines. I don't know. Who is going to love Loki as much as himself?
And we know how different their timelines are because she said she knew she was adopted.
Yes.
And so in this episode, we've seen how early she was taken away.
Yeah.
So if she was told she was adopted at that age, that is an entirely different person from the Loki that we know, who didn't learn that until the first Thor movie.
And our Loki did not learn it gently.
Right. He was not sat down with his parents and said, now we have something we have to tell you. This doesn't mean we don't love you.
Right. It wasn't a 1980s after school special.
I'd like to once again thank Anne for joining me and providing her own unique insights into the show. The penultimate episode is already out, and boy are there a lot of Easter eggs in there that are available for us to discuss, in addition to the actual meat of the show, so prepare for another extra long Welcome to Geektown. Next month, we'll be getting back into regular listener questions, and I'd love to hear from you with any of those you may have. You can send your emails to welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you prefer to ask more anonymously. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, you can do so at patreon.com/welcometogeektown, where for just $1 per month, you get access to scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them,
Welcome to Geektown, population us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.